All right, we'll back into the meeting, and the meeting has started. Commissioner Box, yes. Like to recognize Chairman. Like to recognize Chairman Woodson with the Fisheries Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really looking forward to the conversation today. As members will recall, we had a robust conversation and presentations during the preview at our last month's meeting. Before we get started, I would just like to say I'm so thrilled that we're in Knoxville, Tennessee. In many ways, this is a chosen home for me, and so being in East Tennessee is always a joy, and there's something about crossing the Cumberland Plateau and coming to these hills and this wonderful valley that just feels great. So I'm pumped to be here. And we'll just go ahead and get started. And if our Fisheries Chief, Frank Fiss, could join us. We'll start with Proclamation 1810 on commercial fishing.
Okay, great. Thank you, Madam Chairman. We're here to look at 4 proclamations today. They're the same proclamations that I previewed last month, and I'm going to go over the same information again, and hopefully I'll make it clear this time, as clear as last time. And we got a new audience, so I'm happy to share it with new people too.
Thank you.
So the first proclamation is our Commercial Fishing Proclamation 1810. And before I get into that, we've got some exciting news about commercial fishing. Our Asian Carp Harvest Incentive Program, which the agency funded as of July 1 this year, has hit the ground as of a few days ago. We have contractors in place, and we have money set aside to subsidize that carp fishing industry. The nets have been on order for months. All this work, I can thank our commercial fishing coordinator, Eric Gaines, who did a lot of the heavy lifting, all the heavy lifting on this with the help of the Department of General Services and the F&A department downtown. It was a pretty complex paperwork to get organized, but he did it. So we're really excited to have that project on the ground as quickly as it has happened. So I'm sure we'll be giving updates on that project throughout the year as it goes on. But to get back to the proclamation itself, our process for commercial fishing each year is that we meet with a commercial fishing advisory committee. We met in June, and they provide input and comments on our proposals, and they sometimes give us proposals. Well, this year they were focused on carp pretty much. They wanted more time to gill net in the creeks in April and May to help control carp. They wanted access to the Camden WMA, and they wanted the Duck River opened in a section that had been historically closed. So I'll go through each of these specifically. Starting with the creek closures, there's a little background on this is that in April and May, a lot of these creeks and bayments are very popular with crappie fishermen and bass fishermen. So there's been a restriction in place where commercial fishermen effectively can only fish at night. They're allowed in there an hour after sunset and have to be out of there by 5 in the morning to eliminate this conflict. So they would like to get more time, and their request, and to date that conflict has been resolved with the existing regulation. What the commercial fishermen were asking for was a little bit more time to start the process at 6 o'clock and then be allowed to leave as late as 8 o'clock in the morning. The Tennessee Wildlife recommendation is that we don't want to allow quite that much time in there. We'd like to start with 1 hour extra in the morning to see how that goes. We know we still have active crappie fishermen in these areas, and we don't want to recreate the problem that we've had in the past. So we just want to go slowly into this and add just 1 extra hour. The other recommendation was to open the Camden WMA to commercial fishing when it's flooded. This is the Camden WMA. There's water will come up on this property, and it can be a good place to catch carp. It's also a good place to catch crappie when that happens. So it's used by both sport and commercial. It has potential to be used by commercial and sport fishermen at the same time. So we are interested in opening this to the commercial fishermen, but we want to have that nighttime restriction on it just like we do on creeks and embayments on reservoirs. The third recommendation they had was to open the Duck River from river mile 1.4 to 4 to commercial fishing of all gear types. And right now, and historically, it has been closed to protect paddlefish. It was thought to be kind of a nursery area, perhaps, for striped bass and paddlefish, or at least a refuge because of water temperatures in there. But the problem is we also have a lot of Asian carp using this area as well. So we're willing to see how it goes if we were to allow commercial harvest in this water. If we can get the benefit of removing carp, it's probably worth the trade-off of maybe harassing some paddlefish. But we can monitor this as we go on, but we support this recommendation, and it's written into the edited copies of Proclamation 1810 that Commission has. Another change is to limit the movement of shad away from the water alive. We're going to get into this discussion. This was a latter presentation last month. We will get into this topic a lot heavier in the third presentation, but just for now, this edit would be to limit the movement of skipjack herring, gizzard shad, and threadfin shad away from the water alive. Commercial fishermen don't do this a lot anyway, so it's really not an issue to them, but we wanted to close down this potential vector. When we talk about controlling carp nationally and regionally, all those strategic planning efforts recognize that we don't want to have these fish accidentally moved as bait, so this would be a way to limit that opportunity. Again, the Commercial Fishing Advisory Committee supported this recommendation last month. So we had no negative comment back from them on that. Another recommendation we have is to change some language so that commercial gear cannot be set within 1,000 yards below the TVA or core dam. Now, the old language says that it's prohibited, and what that is doing, in effect, is limiting the use of ramps that might happen to be within 1,000 yards of the dam, and that's not what we would like to do in the future. And I don't know that it was ever the intent of this language, but it was being interpreted that way. So we want to make it clear that commercial fishermen can use those ramps, they just can't set their gear in those areas. And lastly, we have a series of deletions that are reflected in the red line copies that I provided to the Commission, and they're deleting sections that are otherwise in rule or statute. And the section 2, licenses and permits, is currently in rule. Item A in section 3 is in rule, or is in statute. Item K is in rule. All this to say that there's no change to anything that commercial fishermen can and can't do because of these deletions. It's just because this is already written elsewhere in either rule or statute. And lastly, I wanted to revisit a concern that we received not from commercial fishermen but by some members of the angling public across the country about commercially harvested large catfish. We received a few letters that there was concern that more catfish are being hauled out of Tennessee for private pay lakes in northern states. Currently, commercial fishermen are limited to the harvest of one catfish over 34 inches a day. They can catch unlimited numbers of other sizes, but for these big fish, they're limited to one. And we don't think that there's that big a problem, and we certainly can't document any issue with that. So we have no recommendation on catfish at this time. And that concludes the Proclamation 1810.
Thank you, Chief. Are there any questions from members of the committee? Commissioner Woods?
A couple of things, Frank. What about the Camden bottoms there? You know, all those drawed blinds are in there. What about during duck season?
Yeah, that's a good point. That opening is included under the section of the proclamation that addresses WMAs, and there's a set of restrictions of dates when you can't be in there because of duck hunting. So it would be part of that set. I think it's Group A or Group B WMA areas, so it should not conflict with the duck hunting.
So, I mean, nobody be allowed in there during any part of duck season?
Right, just like other WMAs where we're commercial fishing.
Commercial
fishing.
And then I would like to make an amendment to 18-10 that any catfish over 34 inches harvested by commercial fishermen can't be held alive. It has to be, it can be part of their catch for that day, but it can't be kept alive to keep them from hauling them to these pay
Okay.
ponds.
At the last commission meeting, we had Clay Young, the Commercial Fish Advisory Committee Chair. He spoke to that type of suggestion, and favorably he said that the industry didn't like the perception that they are exporting fish because they don't think it's a big deal. So they'd be fine with that, I guess is what I'm
I'd like to put that in form of a motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Woods. Why don't we first go ahead and get this proclamation properly before us? Is there a motion on the proclamation? Moved by Commissioner Swan. Is there a second? Second by Commissioner Box. Commissioner Woods has offered an amendment. Would you repeat your amendment?
To any catfish over 34 inches harvested by commercial fishermen may not be kept alive.
Is there a second to the motion on the amendment? Second by Commissioner Swan. Discussion. If I might just ask the agency position on this motion?
We already have language in proclamation that restricts the movement of catfish less than 8 inches alive for other reasons, so it would be easy to add it to that section. I feel comfortable with the amendment because the Commercial Fish Advisory Committee said last month that they did not see an issue with this for them. It certainly wouldn't change the number of big fish that are harvested in a day. It just changes their disposition, and that's so.
Commissioner Sanders?
No, I'll back up.
Okay, great. Any further discussion from members of the committee? Any questions from members of commission who don't serve on committee, because we're going to do this a little bit differently. I know we've got a couple of issues that folks might have interest in. Any other questions? With that, are there any members of the public who might want to comment on this specific amendment? With that, all those in favor of the amendment say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. You adopt. We're back on the proclamation. Further discussion, members? Any discussion or questions related to this proclamation from members of commission who aren't on the committee? Any members of the public who might like to comment on this proclamation? With that, all members of the committee in favor of Proclamation 1810 on commercial fishing as amended say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. You adopt. Thank you, members. Chief, you are recognized on Proclamation 1811 on commercial musseling. Sounds funny to me. I don't know why.
Thank you. This proclamation recommendations are very simple. These are all housekeeping recommendations. We deleted section 3, 5, 6, and 7. Sections 5, 6, and 7 are in the rule that this commission passed last year, and section 3A is related to the take of protected species, and that is already in statute and doesn't need to be repeated in proclamation. So we're really making an effort, as you can tell, to only have things in proclamation that should be in proclamation. And I hope we're getting very close to that. And that's the end of the recommendations for the commercial mussel proclamation 1811.
Great. There's a motion by Commissioner Swan. Sorry, old habits must really die hard. 7 years. Commissioner Swan, is there a second? Second. A second by Commissioner Sanders. Discussion or questions of Chief Fiss? Any from non-members of the committee? Any members of the public? With that, all those in favor of Proclamation 1811 on commercial musseling say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. You adopt. Next, Chief Fiss, Proclamation 1812 on bait.
Okay. I think this is the proclamation that has attracted some participation from the public, so I'm glad to see people here to be aware of this problem and to be aware of what we're trying to do with Asian carp. Of all the public comments that we received in the last, in the 3-week comment period that we had, most of them were with regard to this bait proclamation, and a lot of them seemed to think that we were proposing a statewide regulation, which we are not, but I think it's a fair conversation to have while we're having this conversation about what we are proposing. So let me move on here. So the agency has been, and other agencies across the country have been trying to limit the spread of Asian carp from one water to another. There's I mentioned several planning documents that identify bait bucket introductions as a possible vector for moving carp that we don't want. The agency has put signs up around all the waters that have Asian carp in great numbers so that people are aware, and we're working on new materials so people can identify these fish easier. There's some cards that I put on the press table back there that may still be there that you're welcome to have that identify these small fish should you encounter them. If anyone in the state, anywhere in the state except Mississippi River, sees small Asian carp, we really want to know about it, because we're really having a hard time documenting reproduction of these fish, and that will be, if we see small fish, we need to know soon so we can get our rapid response plan in place. So anyway, we're very concerned about the thought of Asian carp being moved from one body of water to another. So what could happen if you just had a few fish get loose in a lake? That's a fair question. If there was no reproduction in that lake, you would end up with an extremely low abundance of carp and an extremely low probability of boating hazards. If you don't know, silver carp are the ones that jump and they could hit you while you're boating down the lake. And we would expect very low impact, if any, to our natural resources if just a few fish got in the lake. However, if these fish were able to reproduce in the lake, they have great potential to be abundant. They can be very successful. Examples of that are in the Mississippi, Ohio, and Illinois rivers. They would become boating hazards, so lakes that traditionally are used for wakeboarding or just playing water sports. Of course, I fish, so I don't know what these boating sports are, but they're the ones that make the noise. The boating hazards would become more likely, so it would not only be an issue to fishermen, but it's an issue to the boating industry, which is very, very valued across the state. There would be potential fisheries impacts if we had reproducing Asian carp in a water body. We're seeing problems on Kentucky Lake reported by fishermen that can't fish the way they would like to because of all the carp being in the way. And there's no doubt that when you have potentially hundreds of thousands of fish enter a cove that you planned on fishing that day, you've got to change your plans for where you're fishing or how you're fishing. And the most important issue here is that an introduction would be irreversible. We don't have a silver bullet to undo a carp population that is reproducing. All the efforts that we've done to date are to control their movement or leading up to controlling their movement or reducing their abundance just so their probability of movement is lower. So which of these categories would we expect if carp were introduced into a lake near you? That really depends on the lake. We have no way of predicting which lakes would be more productive. We could guess any lakes that have headwater rivers that are tens of miles long would have potential to have reproduction. This graphic here just shows how carp spawn. They have to have flowing water. If you put carp in your pond or a closed lake with no tributaries to it, they would not reproduce. They have semi-buoyant eggs that have to be suspended in the water column, and then they ride that current for hours while their eggs hatch. But at the temperatures they're spawning at, between 65 and 80 degrees, they may only need a day to a day and a half of current to produce a fry that's going to hatch out of that egg. So this whole process on the screen here, from spawning to hatching, it could be a day to a day and a half, and that's all the habitat and opportunity they need. Well, let's talk about where bighead and silver carp are right now. This line, the blood red line, it's the Mississippi River and Ohio rivers, represent reproducing Asian and bighead and silver carp populations. Every year we see reproduction from those systems on these fish. Now, when you look at Kentucky and Barkley Lakes, the lower end of Cumberland River, we don't see juvenile fish in these systems normally. In 2015 was the first year we saw small Asian carp in that system, and we haven't seen them since. So there is the potential to have small fish there, which are the most likely fish to get confused as bait. We're not worried about somebody accidentally catching a 12-pound fish and thinking it's something else. It's these small fish that would be easier to confuse. So the likelihood of somebody catching carp and not knowing it or thinking they have shad from the Mississippi River is really high. The likelihood of that happening from Kentucky and Barkley Lake is fairly low right now, but it's very possible, and we've witnessed it. And in addition to the limited reproduction, we don't even know where those fish from 2015 came from, if they were spawned in the lake and we just missed where it happened, or did we have that much immigration coming upstream from the Ohio River. These locks that are on the Kentucky lock and Barkley lock combined open and close about 6,600 times a year. So there's a lot of opportunity for fish every day of all sizes to swim upstream into these reservoirs. That's why I think these lower reservoirs on the Tennessee-Cumberland system are kind of sinks for these recent immigrants of small fish potentially. And for that reason, I'm concerned about what goes on those water bodies. Now, when you go upstream to, say, Wilson and then Wheeler, we don't see great numbers of Asian carp in those systems. You get a few stragglers of, just small schools of bighead carp that are running upstream in the Tennessee Valley. But the silver carp, the most upstream point we've seen them as of this year is Decatur, Alabama, which is in Wheeler. So when you think about, just to finish this out, when you think about Cheatham and Old Hickory Lake, which are the uppermost rivers or reservoirs on the Cumberland River, we know we have silver carp and bighead carp in those systems, but we don't see the small fish in there. The thinking is that by the time these fish come out of Barkley and have time to go up into those lakes, they've added growth. These fish grow very fast. Once they're over 10 or 12 inches, I would like to think that most fishermen could tell them apart from other bait species. So just follow that logic when you see what we're talking about restrictions later. But what is at risk? All that to say, we don't feel that we have silver carp abundance to be concerned about right now upstream of Gunnersville. That's on the Tennessee side, and we don't have them to speak of any reported yet in Cordell Hull. So these areas are at risk of having fish moved to them. Now, eventually, without barriers in place, these fish will swim to these areas. There's no doubt about it, whether we have anyone moving them as bait or not. But there's time. It can take years for these fish to jump from one reservoir to the next. We're working on barriers right now. We're testing in the spring of 19 in Kentucky. If we get technology that works, we want to be able to deploy it maybe below Gunnersville, maybe below Nickajack to keep Asian carp out of East Tennessee. But if fish get moved upstream of one of those strategic barrier locations and they happen to reproduce, then we've got a problem because they've jumped the barrier, and the fish will always be able to move downstream because there's no barrier to that in any of these structures. So that's at risk for sure, these upstream areas where we don't have them now. And certainly all the tributary impoundments that we have in the system are at risk. The only way these fish can get into those systems is through a bait bucket or intentional release. And these are some of the, they're all great fisheries, but these are, there's just no reason for this to happen on these waters, and we want to make sure that it does not happen. So also at risk, though, are people that fish bait. I mean, we want a recommendation that will control the problem, but we don't want to create any needless restrictions for people that are currently fishing in East Tennessee. So we're really balancing a set of risks and probabilities here. We recognize that striped bass fishing was there 60,000 trips a year. We stock 1 million striped bass. The striped bass fishermen are probably the most likely people to encounter or to move bait for sure, but they may be some of the better ones at identifying bait at the same time because they're so used to seeing them. But all that to say that these, I'm very aware of those fisheries, and that's why we didn't do something that would have been simple and maybe easier to enforce, which would be a statewide ban. So I'm getting ahead of myself, but I just wanted you to know that we're aware of how striped bass fishermen invest time, energy, and money into bait, and how it's an important part of the fishery. It's hard to fish without it sometimes. So as a group, we looked at many alternatives to manage this risk. We looked at just continuing our outreach. You know, don't move carp as bait. That's our party line here, if you will, for carp. And I think people are hearing it, and we get more opportunities to share that. But but should we limit it to that? You know, the other thing we could do is keep educating people and then have a rapid response only if and when we see small fish. You know, in this case, we would have to declare just the Mississippi River at risk right now, because there's always small fish in the Mississippi River. Or we could do a limited restriction, just restrict the waters where carp, especially young carp, have been observed in substantial numbers. And that gets back to the Mississippi River, Kentucky Lake, and Barkley Lakes. Lastly, we could consider a statewide prohibition of shad and skipjack away from the water, and that's the model that Kentucky and Arkansas have put in place. It's much simpler to do, but you know, with the state geographically laid out like we kind of have an east-west opportunity here to not go to that option until we absolutely have to. So I've already pretty much said this, but this is our recommendation, is that skipjack, herring, gizzard shad, and threadfin shad may not be transported away from the water alive from the Mississippi River, Barkley, Kentucky, and Pickwick reservoirs, and any tributaries or oxbows of these waters. This restriction does not apply to the Duck River above Normandy Dam. And incidentally, we've had carp almost to Henry Horton Park now on the Duck River, which is hundreds of, above I-65. So they're practically to Normandy Dam, but there's no opportunity for them to get into Normandy Dam. So that is our recommendation. That's the only recommendation for Proclamation 1811. And I want you to see what this looks like. Basically, all of West Tennessee and the watersheds associated with Barkley and the Duck River would be restricted. It's not a statewide proposal that the agency is making. And with this restriction, keep in mind that transportation is only limited in only one direction. You would still be allowed to harvest bait in a restricted water body and keep it alive that day on the water. You could still fish with these things on the water on Kentucky Lake if you caught them there. You could collect live bait on non-restricted waters and haul it to any water body in the state still. You could collect fish on, I don't know, Cordell Hull, and you could run them to Kentucky Lake. We're only interested in that one direction of movement. You could purchase live bait and use it on restricted waters and other waters, as you can now. And you could still possess any bait that you've legally harvested, obviously not from the restricted areas, but you could keep those bait at your home in preparation for future fishing trips. So that does conclude the presentation for 1811.
Great. Thank you, Chief. First,
I'm sorry, 1812, yes.
1812 for sure.
Yes, thank you.
First, thank you. As with all of the proclamations before us during this session of the commission meetings and committee meetings. I really appreciate the time and intentionality you've taken. On this one particularly, I very much value the process that you've gone through, the listening to feedback from sportsmen and biologists and others, and sharing that with us in a way that can very much inform our thinking here. With that, so that we might begin the conversation, is there a motion on Proclamation 1812 regarding bait? There's a motion by Commissioner Sanders. Is there a second? Second by Commissioner Woods. Now discussion or questions for Chief Fisk by members of the committee. Seeing none, any other members of the commission, do you have a question? Commissioner Cox.
Would you go back to the slide that shows the distribution, please, sir?
Sure thing.
Right there, whoa.
Yep.
All right, the map you've got that shows the prohibition doesn't appear to include the Red Lake River on the Cumberland up there, whatever that reservoir is.
Cheatham and Old Hickory are not included in that.
All right, well, you don't, if it's got silver and big head in it, why is it not included?
The fish that have been in those lakes have, when we had the small fish everywhere, we saw them first in Kentucky and Barkley, and we never saw abundant fish that were small in Cheatham and Old Hickory. We're still thinking that those fish are either being spawned somewhere in the lower system and taking a while to get up there, or they're migrating into the lower system and taking a while to get up there. And in that time, they're getting bigger. So we feel like we can manage that risk right now.
Or
I don't think people are going to take a really large carp and confuse it. I mean, we're worried about fish, 11 inches and down probably is I think we can educate through the rest of it.
You said a minute ago that you'd rather not do East Tennessee unless you have to. What is the determination, what is the trigger that's going to say, okay, now we have to do it?
If we get reports of small shad in Nickajack or Upper Gunnersville, then we'll be we'll be requesting an immediate, potentially, proclamation change to limit that.
But with all due respect, isn't that too late?
Well, we managed through 2015 when we had all those small fish in there. We might have got lucky, but we're going to be way more prepared next time in getting the word out too. The fish that have moved from Kentucky Lake to Pickwick or Kentucky to Cheatham and Old Hickory have moved through the locks. We don't have any reason to think that bait buckets have done any damage yet, which is probably why why we've been fairly slow to move on this regulation. You could argue that we should have done it 10 years ago.
Well, I understand what you're doing, but the fisheries in this state are premier to most of the country, and it's one of the greatest assets we've got. And I want to be careful, in my opinion, about protecting these resources. And I know the fishermen, I certainly don't want to put any undue stress on them, but I just, I asked some of these guys that are here, how much is the fishery worth to you? I'm assuming you're opposed doing East Tennessee. How much is the fishery worth to you, and what are you willing to give up to save it? So if we're not going to do this, then we need to analyze why we're not doing it. It's got CWD to deer, and limiting one county in Ohio and trying to enforce that, and which was silly. But I don't know. I don't feel good about this, and I don't know whether the committee will recommend or not. But it's just what chance are you willing to take to, and I understand. I've talked to Chief Fiss, and I get what the reproduction and all that. I'm just cautioning, or I'm talking about being very cautious about being afraid to go too far to protect our fishery, and then oops, it's too late because we've got them. And where'd they come from?
Any other questions from non-members of the commission or the committee? Commissioner Baker.
Yes, sir. When you're right there on upper waters of Chickamauga, you got this eDNA of a big. Did you have a big head carp right there below Watts Bar Dam?
Yeah, we had an eDNA hit, which meant they collected a water sample that had carp in it, and it was big head carp. So the big head carp are known to have traveled at least that far, but they've been traveling in very low numbers, and we've never seen a young big head carp. We feel like those things are big cruisers that are coming out of the Ohio and coming up. Mm-hmm. But they could fool us next year. They could start spawning. We just don't know the future on it. So.
Right. Well, I guess my questions are, if we're saying we got to have current there, we got the Hiwassee River coming in that they could go up and spawn. But that being said, I have bought shad from a guy out of Georgia to stock my farm pond with in Bristol. Okay, and he'd show up with a 250-gallon insulated tank in the back of his truck, and he actually told me that he netted those fish underneath Watts Bar Dam that morning and hauled them to my house, and I put them in my farm pond. To me, that's very, very dangerous. I think that we are absolutely, knowing what I know now about this Asian carp, if my pond dam breaks and it runs down and goes into Holston River, okay, and that goes into any of those tributaries we have there, I could have started a huge, huge problem for our state. And this guy makes his living going around selling this. And I know you guys, I see all the complaints we've had here from you striper fishermen, and I understand it. I grew up on Boone Lake, one of the best striped hybrid fisheries there is. But I think if we do not stop this now, we are going to cause a huge problem. And it's not worth it for us to go to the boys in Paris Landing right now and see what it's doing to their tourism. It is not worth us taking a chance for this little bit of folks. And I know a lot of you guys are here today, and I appreciate your business, and I understand it because I've spent a lot of time on the water. But there's creeks on your lakes that you can go catch your shad in. There might be times it'll be rougher than others to catch them. I understand that, but is it worth it? I know I've seen several folks from Norris. I mean, is it worth it for those fish, those Asian carp, to get in Norris and run up the Clinch River and spawn in that natural running river up there and decimate a whole population just because we can move shad around? That's my question.
Any other questions?
I have a comment. I'm kind of like Chad, up East Tennessee's me and Chad, our rivers up there that we use so much, and I'm getting a lot of calls from those fishermen that fish those rivers and lakes up there that, they keep asking me, what are we going to do, what are we going to do? I tell them what we're trying to do in West Tennessee. They said, yeah, but why don't you go ahead and put something in place for up here now so we don't have to ever deal with it. Let's don't wait till it happens. Let's go ahead and deal with it now so we don't have to deal with it in the future.
I mean, one thing you said that Arkansas and Kentucky are already doing. I know Lake Cumberland in Kentucky is a fantastic striper fishery. I mean, I don't think those striper guides up there went out of business just because they hadn't been able to move bait.
I spoke to the chief of Kentucky about that. Those times when they made that recommendation, they expected a lot more resistance to it than they actually got. They were able to get it in, but I think our situation could be different in that we've got a much longer river system and it's spread out a little more. But I agree that you're looking at these risks and probabilities. It's probably a really low probability of it happening. We've got to weigh that against, if it does, it's a major impact. So that was a struggle. This was not an easy decision for our staff to come to this point. We were all over this in both directions for the very reasons that you're talking about. And we're trying to balance opportunity and risk at the same time here. So we welcome I welcome the discussion.
I mean, if we've done a great job as a commission. Some of the older commissioners here, they took on this hog eradication problem and done a great job with that. We've tackled this CWD, and like I said a couple meetings ago, this Asian carp problem is bigger than either one of those put together to the economics of our state. We definitely need to really consider how we're going to move forward with this. I think we need to go with a lot stronger restriction myself.
Without objection, I'll move to public comment. If we could, if there are members of the public who are here to share opinions or testimony on this issue, if you would come to the microphone. As Chairman Cook mentioned, there's 2 minutes. We're really interested in your thoughts and opinions. If you would direct your comments to me as the chairman of the committee, I would greatly appreciate it. Welcome. If you'd introduce yourself and say where you're from, we appreciate you being here.
I'm Ezel Cox. I'm a live bait fisherman. Fish for striped bass, have for many years. A lot of the old commissioners know me. Live bait fishing would just eliminate me from fishing if I could not do it with live bait. It's that plain and simple. Same with the guides that I know. I speak very comfortably for them, I feel, in making my statements. I feel like Mr. Fiss and our biologists have done a good job in planning this. I think let them plan it and work it, and we'll try our best to support them in all the influence that I can with the Tennessee Striped Bass Association, several of the striped bass communities out there. You have no idea how much business we bring into this state. You have no earthly idea. I think you should support the biologist as it's written currently. I see it as a good plan. If it needs modification, I feel like they will jump on it and do a very good job. Appreciate you hearing me.
Thank you.
Thanks for what you guys do too.
Thank you for being here and sharing your opinion.
Thank you.
Any other members of the public?
Madam Chairperson, I am Captain Jim Durham. I own Striper Fun Fishing Guide Service. We are the largest guide service in Kentucky. I have 6 guides on Lake Cumberland. I would offer a different opinion than the gentleman had on Lake Cumberland. Our tourism has suffered because of their knee-jerk reaction on the shad. Business is down. We were doing 60, 70,000 guided trips. In Kentucky, it's probably a third of that now. These people come in, they pay money, they book hotel rooms, they spend money on fuel. From the investigations that were done, I've seen nothing yet where juvenile silver carp have been found anywhere. Some have come in from the Ohio River. Some did get into Kentucky Lake the 1 year, but really it hasn't been proven. There's been 8-10 years of science now. My question would be, how many more years of science do we need before they can finally determine that, gee, this isn't a problem or is a problem? One of the recommendations we initially made in the state of Kentucky was that the commercial guides would take tests on certifications, that they would know the difference between the carp and the shad, and that they would be given a pass and be able to continue to conduct business in that way. Just something for you all to consider. But in looking at all of this, my question again would remain, how much is enough? How many years do you need to study it before you finally conclude that there's no juvenile shad anywhere other than what came in from the Ohio River? it's very difficult in our business. It's a tough business. We sometimes have to get shad from one lake to the other. We have people that come in from 30, 35 different states to fish. And if I go over 2 minutes, just let me know.
Well, could I?
Okay?
What could I say, if it's okay, Chairman Woodson? I misspoke. We usually give folks 3 minutes, and I did
We
misspeak.
do, but I didn't want to correct my chairman.
Well,
so
I was wrong. So
we hereby grant you 1 minute.
Okay, I
and
appreciate
any other
that.
member of the public.
Yeah, with all that being said, my greatest fear would be Asian carp coming in. But we just haven't seen it. And I had business on the Cumberland River. We do a lot of business there. We did it in Kentucky. Well, we stopped all of it. They lost all of my business, which is why actually I'm down here in Tennessee now and on the Cumberland River fishing. But understanding the dangers that are there, no one right now can look me in the eye and say, gee, we've seen these juvenile carp reproduce. So, again, there's been 8-10 years of studies. I guess you all are electroshocking, whatever you're doing. I mean, it's a fear, but I think it has to be balanced. And from a commercial standpoint, I mean, each person who comes in, who pays the guide, pays the room, whatever, from the studies we did, it's about $1,000 a trip. So cut out, 40,000 trips by $1,000, there's your revenue structure. So if something has to be done, I think the professional guides at a minimum should be willing, if we have to do this, let the guides do their business at least. Or at least, we could get shad from a certified bait dealer. So my time is up.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
I appreciate
We
you
really
all.
appreciate
Thank
your
you.
testimony.
Yes.
Thank you. Any other members of the public wishing to share? Okay. With that, we have a motion and a second on Proclamation 1812. Further discussion? Okay, then we'll go to the vote. All those in favor of the proclamation, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. You adopt. Thank you very much. And again, I want to thank you all for the conversation. And again, thank Chief Fiss for an incredible amount of work in balancing biology and other things. I think for me, this limited approach, particularly, and I think I have the quote from Chief Fiss, this, they believe, is a biologically sound recommendation that they would allow. It would ultimately take years for these fish to get to the areas that we've been discussing, and in that time, the agency feels that we have barriers in technology to engage as a strategy actively now, and could be proactive in that work. And so I personally feel very comfortable with this proclamation and appreciate all the testimony and the comments and the process that's gone so far. Excellent. So members will now move to the Sport Fishing Proclamation 1813.
I'd like to say I hope I'm right that we do have years. I don't know that, obviously. But we are watching very closely, and we will be proactive, unlike we've ever been on this thing, if we see more fish.
You've heard loud and clear.
And we've heard other recommendations from the group about things we could do to educate and maybe certify different people to do things. Those are things that we talked about as well. So I think this amendment or this proclamation will give us time to sort out the next steps in a way that can work. So anyway, I'll jump to sport fishing now. This is Proclamation 1813. And the first item is a Calderwood Reservoir. We recently fixed the reciprocal agreement on licensing on Calderwood Reservoir, and there are still some things to sort out. There's a lot of species in Calderwood Reservoir that have different regulations, and we would like to get them all, as many as possible, the same to make it easier to fish Calderwood Reservoir. So this is a list of species that North Carolina, or in Calderwood, the North Carolina's rules for certain species that could be in Calderwood Reservoir, and Tennessee's regulations. Now, the goal here is really, you got to understand that only trout fishing and sunfish and maybe yellow perch are even relevant. The rest of those species, I don't think you could even go out and catch one if you tried, but people go there thinking they might catch one, so they want to have similar regulations if they can, and we're willing to do that. The North Carolina has a pretty cumbersome process compared to ours, and they changed their rules last time to fix the reciprocal zone. So we're proposing that we adopt their regulations on all those species listed there, from smallmouth bass down to catfish. These are not regulations that we would promote for our own fisheries if we had substantial populations of those fish in there. We were simply doing this to simplify the regulations. So the only major change is that the trout regulation is changing from 7 fish with only 2 lake trout to you can have up to 7 lake trout if you can catch them. So we know this will greatly simplify the regulations, and that's why we're wanting to do it. We brought the Watts Bar paddle fishery to you a couple of years ago in 2016. At that time, we were concerned about overharvest, too much catch and release going on, and illegal activity. And it was reduced to the current season that you see there now, or at least reduced to 1 fish per day with no culling. We are still having problems with that fishery. We're still seeing the illegal activity, and we would like to see, and that activity is people trying to buy eggs, which when they're not commercially licensed to do so. And we would like to reduce the length of that season. I guess we could come to you with a half a fish a day limit, but that doesn't work. So our next opportunity is to reduce the season. So we're going to reduce it from May 1 to May 15, keep the same regulation, 1 per day with no culling. And there's been a lot of people gaffing fish to haul paddlefish into their boat, which is adding to that catch and release mortality. We'd like to ban the use of a gaff on a fish like that, any species of fish in Tennessee, while we're at it. So that's how this gaff discussion came up. So we've got language in the red lines that you have that define what a gaff is, and that you can only use them once on a fish that you know you're going to harvest. You can't release that fish once you've gaffed it. That's part of your creel. In addition to that restriction of time, we are also going to ban snagging before and after the proposed season. This is similar to what the Commission did last year on Cherokee Reservoir. This makes a very neat opportunity for the law enforcement officers to know that nobody should be snagging in there for 2 weeks, and then the season opens, everyone knows it's legal, and then following the season we know no one should be in there snagging. Makes it very clear cut as to who can be in there doing what when. And then we move on to the Tellico River, and I want to start out by describing the Tellico River fisheries. The first is I'll start with the delayed harvest season, which runs from October 1st to March 15th. We stock about 2,000 fish for the whole winter to provide a fishery. We don't charge anything for permits, and there's no closed days to fishing. In contrast, we have the Tellico trout fishery, which goes from March 15 to September 15. And during this time, it's stocked weekly with probably like 2,000 fish a week or more. There is a permit required. It's a very intensively managed fishery, so we require more money out of people to provide it. And we have to close to fishing on Thursday and Friday just to make space for the trucks to come through, because parking is so limited on this dangerous roadway next to the Tellico River. But it's this fishery here that we're recommending amendments to. We're having issues in the late summer in many years. This year wasn't too bad, I've learned, but we've had a lot of summers where we have to stop stocking early, or we have to stock less and less of the river. We have to retreat upstream to where we can put fish. So the lower ends of the river that we're still selling permits for aren't really fishable. So as a result of these higher temperatures and lower flows that we're witnessing, we can't haul fish out of our hatchery either if it's stressed out. And the hatchery receives water from the Tellico River. So we've got fish in a raceway that shouldn't be moved at that temperature, and we've got a receiving water that isn't really acceptable to trout. So we want to stop stocking in that last part of the year. And we've had anglers concerned about it. We've got problems at the hatchery because trying to manage a stocking season with no water and temperature and suitable temperatures. Our hatchery our former hatchery manager, now manager of this resource, Travis Scott, did some digging in the old flow data and discovered that this is not a one-off situation. We've been seeing twice as many low water falls or late summers as we have traditionally in the past. So we have data to support this need. So we're proposing to change the dates of the Tellico Citico trout season from the current date. We're basically losing 2 weeks, the worst 2 weeks of the year, but we're adding 2 weeks on the front end of the year when we think we were going to be able to sell a lot more licenses anyway. So that's why we're changing it to avoid hot water. We think we're going to come out at least revenue neutral, if not make even sell more opportunities to fish there. And because we would be moving the Tellico fishery, the permit season up to March 1, we would have to take some time away from the delayed harvest season, and that's why we would now change it to run from October 1 to the end of February, which puts it in line with 5 of the other delayed harvest date ranges that we have on the book. So it fits in there neatly now. Another temperature and water level issue is on Green Cove Pond, which is near it's in the Tellico River Valley, managed by the same hatchery. Currently there's a permit required all year, and it's closed on Thursday and Friday. We would propose that no permit be required in late summer, this August 16th to September 30th, when we're not stocking it. And we wouldn't need to close it any days. If someone wanted to go there and fish, they could. And lastly, on Tellico, we want to close the river in the zone where we host our Free Fishing Day event. It's the Sourwood Campground upstream to Tellico Hatchery on Free Fishing Day only, which is June, the first Saturday after the first Monday in June. And we would close it from the half hour before sunrise to noon. And this closure would affect anglers 17 and older. And we've adjusted that a year since last month to accommodate the Commissioner Gardner's suggestion, which was a good one to get it more in line with the youth hunts. And lastly, we want to take the Polk County stock trout streams that are currently under special regulation, where they're closed on Fridays and they're restricted to single hooks, and make them just like all the other dozens and dozens of stock trout streams in the state, where they're just open to statewide fishing regulations. The reason that these streams had special regulations was we had some issues with logistics on our staff stocking and some enforcement issues, but really we don't have anything. We've fixed the logistical issues, and there's really nothing going on these streams that's any different than any other stock trout stream we have, so there's no reason to have these special regulations in Polk County. That concludes Proclamation 1813, sport fishing.
Motion by Commissioner Swan on Proclamation 1813 related to sport fishing. Is there a second? Second by, who was that? Is that Commissioner Stroud? Thank you. And Commissioner Stroud, before you had a question, I just wanted to make sure that you got a chance. Are you sure? Sorry about that. Any questions by members of the committee? Any? May I ask you a question, Chief Fiss?
Yes.
Was September accidentally omitted for the Tellico proposal, or was that intentional?
Don't know. It's a good time to catch that, though, if I did forget one. For the this one, it's intentionally omitted now. We won't be stocking, and we won't be requiring a permit at that time either. Does that answer the question?
I think so. There may be a follow-up question.
Okay.
Perhaps. Any other members of the committee? Members, non-members of the committee, of the commission have questions? Commissioner Cox?
Let's go back to Watts Bar, please, sir. I don't, currently there's no commercial fishing for paddle fishing on Watts Bar, is that right?
Correct.
Is the snagging and gaffing causing a problem with the resource?
We are not directing effort into monitoring that paddlefish population to the point where I can answer that question, but the observations from the details that worked on those riverbanks to see all the fish getting caught and released, their fish are highly vulnerable at that time of year. There's just we just don't think it's right to allow it to go on.
My issue is that we sell licenses to do this, and there's nothing to indicate that the population is in any danger at all. There's no commercial fishing, which the commercial fishing would like to fish it, and there's previous data to show that there's a substantial large population of large fish up there, and I just wonder if our effort to, while I think snagging and gaffing and then turning the fish loose that may go die is despicable, I'm not sure cutting it out or cutting it down to the point people might not do it and not buy a license is perhaps a way to do it. Just make it no culling at all and let them fish as many days as they want to. Wouldn't that accomplish the same thing?
Well, we already have a season on it to protect the fish, and the people that are there are I would guess that the people that are there are going to have a license anyway and going to fish the season that we offer them. So I don't think there's going to be a big revenue loss for those people. There are great numbers of fish that congregate there that suggests Watts Bar's got a pretty good paddlefish population. Yeah. We're not questioning that. We just because we have it, we don't think that's the best use of it. And then when you consider all the people that are all the observations of people doing illegal things, we have a no culling rule on it already. But if you don't keep that first fish, you can still keep fishing. You can only cull once you've harvested a fish.
But and that seems like to me that's a law enforcement issue.
Well, we're here to serve all divisions.
Commissioner Gardner?
Yeah, Frank, just to follow up on the September in there, it just seems to me like if there's no permit required, that it would make sense to, I mean, even though you might not be lightly stocking it, it would make sense to identify it as a no permit required month.
I think
to decrease confusion over the permit required versus no permit.
Yeah, we only, for anything we do, we only announce when you have to have something. We don't generally say when you don't. But believe me, the people that fish the Tellico area are very in tune with what's happening there. We could add that description between August 15 and October 1st. The river will only be stocked if temperatures are available or something like that. But but they wouldn't have to have a permit. They would still have to have a trout license and a fishing license to fish that body of water.
So you're saying this is for presentation only? The only thing you really publish is the time that you need permits?
That's traditionally what we do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, then that makes more sense. I was just afraid you were going to publicize something that left a month out and there would be some questions about it.
They're real keen on when they need a permit and not a permit down there.
Okay.
I think it will work. I'd be hesitant to say, hey, here's this river in late August and September that you should consider coming to. If that's something we would want to put in print on a fishing guide, not knowing what the year's going to bring. That's the kind of stuff that we better put on Facebook and stuff like that when we can respond to the season we have.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Any further questions from non-members of the committee? With that, any question or any statements from members of the public? Okay. Unless there's further discussion, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor of Proclamation 1813 regarding sport fishing, say aye. Aye. Oppose, no. You adopt. Frank, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Very much. With that, Mr. Chairman, we are concluded in our business, sir.
Thank you, Senator Woodson. Appreciate that. And we have another friend of the commission that's shown up, former Chairman Jeff McMillan. Glad you're here. Welcome. Would you like for us to start over from the beginning to catch you up?
I was actually hoping to address it. Yeah. Mr. Cox, he can shoot you down, but I won't.
So we'll head to the Budget Committee. And first, before we start, I'd like to stop for just a second and thank Commissioner Sanders. For last month, I failed to say this, that I appreciate how hard you worked on the budget. When you have a CPA as the budget chair, he went through everything with a fine-tooth comb, and I really appreciate that. You did a great job on it, and thank you. I'm sorry I failed to mention that, but thank you for all you did.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure that Director Carter or any of the other staff feel the same way, but actually just have one thing. Don Hosse? Oh. Hosse? There you are. We have a expansion request for the 1920 year for Buffalo Ridge.
All right. I certainly appreciate the opportunity. My name's Donald Hosse. I was at the June commission meeting. Hopefully y'all saw the video of Buffalo Ridge Refuge. It's truly a remarkable piece of property that the agency has. It's unlike anything else the agency has. It's dedicated to outreach and education. I know that several commissioners have been to Buffalo Ridge. I hope I can do it justice describing it. It's really hard to see how unique and the variety of opportunities at Buffalo Ridge unless you're there first-handed. I'd also like to say I've got a truly great staff. Freddie Couch is the manager at Buffalo Ridge. Also, Lance Ryder works for me as the shooting sports specialist. He's put a tremendous amount of time and effort into laying out the proposed shooting complex. Also, Colonel Ryder, Director Carter, Assistant Director Bobby Wilson, and myself have had multiple meetings trying to put this plan together. I've been doing outreach programs for the agency for over 20 years. I think with the R3 movement going across the nation, things such as Buffalo Ridge are crucial at this point to our agency. I've been doing the Outdoor Woman program for many years. There's a tremendous amount of people that still want to get in the outdoors. With the hustle and bustles, I think finding creative ways to make more efforts is, something that we really need to be looking forward to as an agency. In case you're not familiar with Buffalo Ridge, it's about an hour west, I-40. You go to exit 143 right before the Tennessee River. The beauty of Buffalo Ridge, it's 5 minutes off the interstate. There's 5 hotels right there at Buffalo Ridge exit, or the Waverly Red Lynn exit. There's also multiple hotels. It's pretty simple to find. We've got property on the Highway 13 side and also right across the river. There's several miles of the Buffalo River that runs through the property, in which we've also got a large tract of property over there. Like I said, it's a little over 1,800 acres. It's been heavily utilized through our agency, not only for our outreach programs, but also in-house training. We've done a lot of stuff with the new officers, the law enforcement division, also all the major divisions of the agencies have done strategic planning meetings out there at Buffalo. It's just, like I said, I can't say enough about it. Also at this point, I'd like to recognize Commissioner Holbert for his generosity. He's been nice enough to donate quite a bit of product, lumber, to help do with the remodel of the barn and other structures out there, and I would certainly like to thank him for his support of Buffalo Ridge. Also, when you first see this expansion that we're coming through, through the multiple meetings, we've also had Dwight Hensley and his crew through engineering have been crucial to this. We've been working with the state architects to come up with this proposed budget expansion, put a lot of time and resources. Also, one thing too that you'll see
Originally, it says that it's 5.78 million. Actuality, it's 5.57 million is the proposed budget expansion. And one thing I would like to reiterate, like everything else, almost with Buffalo Ridge, is solely funded through federal funds. Sportsman's license dollars have not been used, very minimally, for the acquisition and the expansion so far at Buffalo Ridge. Like I said, the vision of Buffalo Ridge is outreach and education, and it truly is a jewel for the agency. All right, you can see on the first slide, and I've got notes. Typically I like to ad lib, but there's so much going on. I want to make certain that we encompass everything in the vision. Buffalo Ridge, the shooting aspect of it, the topography of the property works out tremendously well for what we're wanting to encompass. We're looking at the shotgun courses, of course. We're looking at 2 separate sporting clays courses. We're looking at having 12 to 18 stations per course. Also, we're looking at a 5-stand, which is, of course, a more compact sporting clays course. With that, we'd like to have 5 stations with 8 machines. Another thing we'd like to do is start off with at least 4 trap and skeet fields over there at Buffalo Ridge. You know, in addition to our SCTP teams, wing shooting clinics, we 2 weekends ago had wounded soldier dove hunts out there. I'm actively involved with the Outdoor Woman program, also help Lacey out quite a bit with the Toys program. And I can go on with the utilization of these courses. In addition to that, something that's unique, not only pistol pits that we have designed, but then also we're looking at a 50-yard range, a 100-yard range. And one thing that's extremely difficult to find in the state of Tennessee is a 1,000-yard range. As I mentioned, I do the Outdoor Woman program up at the Clyde York 4-H Center in Crossville. Also help Toys out up at Clyde York. We have the, thank goodness, Bridgestone Firestone, a tremendous resource right down the road, which we have a 1,000-yard range. There's no doubt that every time we offer that class, people are losing their minds trying to get into it. It's a truly unique thing to have in addition. I got the button right now, I think. All right, another thing to encompass that also, you know, of course, we want to put in pistol pits. We want to incorporate the Scholastic Action Shooting Program, have the 4 separate bays where we can have all components of the SASP course incorporated into it. And then also, of course, the pistol pits can be utilized for other pistol programs that the agency may have. Another thing, too, is the archery. It's like I said, once you get out there and can ride around and see the lay of the land, we've got a great spot picked out where we can do a sight-in course, not only have block targets where people can shoot broadheads, but also have 3D targets all the way from 10 yards to 60 yards. And then we've got a tremendous place where we can have walk-through archery courses. We'd like to have a minimum of 2, if not 3 walk-through archery courses with about 20 to 30 targets. 3D targets per course. You know, that would give us the capability to host district, regional, and state shoots for the Tennessee Scholastic 3D archery tournaments. And like I said, I can't go on enough about this piece of property, the accessibility and everything it has to offer. Then the big ticket item, the Hunter Education Center. As you'll see if you've ever been there, we've got about 300 acres that's directly on Highway 13. It's easy accessibility. You have your power, you have your water, you have everything that you need, easy access to get into the piece of property. All the shooting ranges and then the Hunter Education Center are designed around the Highway 13 property. Not to mention the numerous outreach programs that we're already doing on the facility. You know, literally thousands of people are coming to Buffalo Ridge a year now for the outreach and then also the in-house training. So to expand on the program, for instance, with the toy program, the Outdoor Woman program, Clyde York's a nice facility. It's expensive, and then also you're limited on your classrooms. You only have so many places that you can do your stuff. For instance, we had our trapper workshop at Buffalo Ridge last year. We had about 170 people registered for the workshop. Tornadic activities, I was thinking we'd be lucky to get 100. Lo and behold, we had over 400 people show up to Buffalo Ridge for a trapper education workshop for one weekend. We certified 328 people for that particular workshop. Getting to the Hunter Education Center, not to mention all the different programs, the obvious, you know, hunter education classes. I think it's definitely a place where we can start having our hunter ed instructor banquets out there at Buffalo Ridge, not to mention toys and outdoor woman. We do a lot already for wounded soldiers out there at Buffalo Ridge, but we could build on the programs. And then with the shooting sports complex, it'd be a way in which we could hold a variety of district, regional, even some state tournaments, depending on the disciplines and the availability. So I think it would be a highly utilized resource. It already is, and I think anything we can do to help enhance it and expand it is only going to be another feather in our cap. One thing too, that if you ever go, when you do go to Buffalo Ridge, when you come to the proposed site, when you first come in, there's a smaller pond that I think would be crucial to expand to about a 5 to 7 acre reservoir. It would be ideal. You know, we have the Mississippi or the Buffalo River running through the property, but we don't really have per se a lake there. Through our youth, our women's programs, the paddle sports have become very popular. Also, outdoor classrooms have become extremely popular. It would be a great location for a free fishing day event. Not to mention, you know, make it wheelchair accessible. That's one thing. Buffalo Ridge, Shane Hall was a great man, very much missed. We're in the process now putting 5 Moment of Freedom blinds on Buffalo Ridge. In addition to that, we got a great waterfowl impoundment with minimal work. I think a little bit of a screw gate where we could regulate the water. It borders the Buffalo River that we could easily put a Moment of Freedom waterfowl impoundment also on the refuge. But when you come into Buffalo Ridge, where we're looking at all these improvements, here's a map. You come directly in, the first thing you're going to see is this 7 acre lake. It's got a picturesque setting off to your side where the Hunter Education Center would actually overlook the lake. And then the flow of the land, we use the topography to have, you know, our 50-yard or 100-yard ranges right up there by the education center. And then you go through the courses and you can kind of see the layout for the sporting clays, the walk-through archery, and things such as that. So, like I said, I know I've kind of rambled. There's so much going on out there. There's not enough I can say, but one unique thing about Buffalo Ridge, we like to really think outside of the box. We're like to always looking for places to, you know, find alternative funding and get people involved in the outdoors. And we had lucky enough that Commissioner Box viewed the property yesterday and decided she would take part in some of our outdoor activities. And actually, this is where our new officers, we had 9 this past year that were hired on, and we have a workout, a training room, and very impressively, she scaled the rope twice and rung the bell at the top. So, anyway, it's not quite. He said he was good.
She's doing better than the new officers.
There you go. Well, like I said, I know I've kind of blown through it, and I would certainly love to field any and all questions. I'm very passionate about Buffalo Ridge, amongst a lot of other people with this agency, and also the tremendous volunteers that we've got with through our Hunter Education Program and all the other ones that help make this place a success.
Thank you, Don. The passion did not come out at all in that presentation.
No.
And it was worth $5 million to see Angie climb that rope. So. All right. So what is the actual number on the proposal?
It's a $5.57 million, and that would encompass the lake, the shooting sports, all the disciplines that we associated with, and the big ticket item, you know, is building the infrastructure, the archaeological surveys, the permits, and all the beauties of being a state agency. And then, of course, the Hunter Education Center is going to be a pretty good size of that.
Thank you. All right. We've heard the proposal, so we need a motion.
So moved. Second.
We have a first and a second. Open for discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I've got a quick comment. I was there and visited.
Did you climb the rope?
No, they couldn't get me up there. and I thought it was, I took the tour and I thought it was fabulous. I'll mention Freddie Couch, and I've forgotten the other gentleman's name to volunteer, and Lance and Donald and the guys that are working on this. This is going to be a fabulous place. It's very unique, probably to anywhere in the region of states. But the only thing I would caution you is not to be too conservative on it. I don't. The education center, I think it's 7,500 feet or something
Around there, yes, sir.
Don't underestimate what you might need.
Sure.
So and you may have already designed it too far, but I wouldn't underestimate and build it too small.
Yeah, and it's still in the infancy. The main thing is trying to get a grasp and get approval, and it's going to be a lengthy process, but I think you're exactly right. Just through the interest, like I mentioned with the Trapper Workshop, in addition to, all the youth and the women programs, and, it's already being utilized, and I think it's going to continue to expand, and it's definitely a good point.
Commissioner Holbert, did you have a question or a statement? Okay. Any questions, comments from the Commissioner Box?
I just want to add to the comment. Yesterday when we were there, it's amazing how these guys creatively use their resources and cutting costs on every single item, and how it was just incredible to see their working. And I think it's going to be world class. It's going to attract a lot of opportunity, and I'm excited about seeing it. So
No, we certainly appreciate y'all's support.
thank y'all for all the hard work.
No, you're very welcome, and thank you for the opportunity more than anything. Like I said, we've, affected thousands and thousands of people so far over the years on this piece of property, and it's just a drop in the bucket of what I think we're going to be doing in the future for sure.
Any other comments from the committee? Any comments from the public? All right, we have a first and a second. I'll take a motion to pass, or a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Mr. Chairman, we are concluded.
Thank you, Chairman Sanders. And I think when Commissioner Cox says don't be too conservative on something, you have to pay attention to that, because in 3.5 years, I don't believe I've heard that. So that's, yeah, so we have to agree with that. Director Carter and our legal staff has asked us, the commission, to stay for a few minutes. We need to discuss something privately. And so let's stay after, as soon as we're finished here. Let's check with Director Carter, I'm not sure. Any comments from the commission?
I got one more. Just a quick moment to the former commissioners that are here. Just to let you know, you guys are talked about a lot. And just seriously, thank you for the job you did before us, because it makes our job a whole lot simpler to carry on something that was started and is good. All four of you did excellent jobs. All four of you were chairman. Just an honor to call all four of you a friend, and I mean that as sincerely as I can, and I'm glad y'all are here today.
I have to pile on, Mr. Chairman. I can't help myself. I would just say, as we've had so many new faces join and incredible leaders join this commission, as I think about these folks who are here today and who may be with us in the coming days, you all set the perfect example about what our mission is as commissioners, the approach as leaders, and I really appreciate you. It is one of the many things that gives me total confidence when I roll off next year, because we've got a huge group of new, thoughtful leaders that are out of your same branding, and I really appreciate your leadership. So, Commissioner Holbert, I absolutely feel the same way and just have such love and respect for these folks.
Yeah.
Commissioner Stroud?
Yeah, I served with these guys. Yeah, all I know is, if you remember the Sand Hill Crane vote, when the lady brought the phone with the sample of the Sand Hill Crane going off, and she started hyperventilating, and all four of these guys headed for the door there. I was by myself. That's what I remember with y'all. It's right here, yeah. It's good to see y'all.
Yeah, right. Bring the building down. Any other comments from the commission? Director Carter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just at your discretion, I know you want to do some visiting here. We could certainly push this until tomorrow, until the end of the meeting tomorrow, if that would be your preference. It's certainly fine with us. It's not time sensitive.
Tomorrow sounds great. Is that okay with everybody? Because tomorrow's pretty quick anyway.
The other thing I just wanted to say, thanks again for the recognition a while ago, especially the pistol. I don't usually get tongue-tied, but thank you very much for that. I really appreciate it.
We would like to do a picture with Ed, the entire commission. So as soon as we're finished here, let's get a picture. And any other comments? Well, we're adjourned until 9 in the morning. Thank you.